I hope that this afternoon has been a really engaging conversation with folks, and I've seen folks get a chance to talk with each other. That's really great, and I've hopefully expect that there have been amazing connections that have been made. Really, our goal is for this summit to be a space for folks to connect and to interact and collaborate. But as positive as the SDGs are, there's the dark side. And so we've got to be cognizant to think about what is the implications of these technologies for things that we're not thinking about. How is this technology going to be used in ways that are both nefarious players can take advantage of communities, governments can abuse, and others. And so Lee is going to talk a bit about that. He's got some slides. As this is a fireside chat, it's going to be a conversation, and so Jalal will join in, but we really do want you all to be a part of this discussion. For those who are not here, hashtag AISDG is your opportunity to be, I'm going to keep branding it, it's your opportunity to be a part of the conversation today and beyond. So please, Lee.
Thanks so much, and it's again, I feel guilty, but I guess maybe the professor's ego, not that guilty for being back on stage again, because I do have, I think, another relevant message for everyone here to be considering, because again, there's wonderful potential for machine learning, for artificial intelligence, as we've been discussing, for advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's not just Hollywood movies where there's nightmare scenarios related to AI. So my shorthand phrase, and you see I have a few coined phrases for these kinds of things, are good, bad, and ugly AI. Okay, so we can guess good AI would be AI that was developed by perhaps a future certified ethical AI developer that was thinking about bias, was thinking about inclusivity, was thinking about sustainable development goals, and of course is technically effective and efficient and reaching all kind of positive outcomes by design. Bad AI is not that. It's, I'll say it, we're not in Silicon Valley, so I'll use my typical phrase for this, sloppy Silicon Valley, where it's write the code as fast as possible, push it out the door. You haven't checked, the issues around bias, everything that we talked about throughout the day. There's been none of that, and probably worse than that, at least from where I sit, worrying about security, the code. Who's worrying? Have we worried about the code at all? How do we know that even if it was meant to be good, it was not badly designed and easily infected and could be turned against us or turned against someone else? So the example, from a RAND, so I'll pick on RAND because we have RAND here. So you have some seconds to respond or think about this. But a RAND study said, what about autonomous cars, basically, that turned bad? So if there was a fleet of 100,000 autonomous vehicles that got infected. Okay, so we could say the good news reported by RAND was, you know what? It wouldn't be that bad for the insurance industry. Okay, seriously, that's the conclusion of the RAND report. So I don't know what exactly the mayhem that would have been caused by the 100,000 infected autonomous vehicles. Well, again, that's just one of the many, you can think of any number of nightmare scenarios, and it's not just to be scary, but that's the truth. Just, we know what happens when code gets infected, either through a zero-day exploit, through bad or poor design. So bad design, then that becomes ugly. So that's the ugly or evil AI, when somebody's taken over a bad AI design and turned it into purposely doing mayhem. So this is not, right now this is theoretical, largely. There aren't that many AI systems that have gotten into the hands of malicious evildoers yet, but there will be more. We know this will be coming. So we have to be ready for this, and we have to be preparing for it, and we have to be trying to prevent it.
Yeah. That's a study that I haven't really come across yet.
Yeah, you can neither confirm nor deny.
I'll definitely.
It's a RAND report.
I won't be defending RAND at all because we pride ourselves in objective, data-driven research. But I mean, if that's what the data points to, I guess they had some sort of justification to to report what they did.
What
But
we can report quickly is that every panel that I'm on apparently is going to be controversial. So continue, please.
No, on that point, I was reading and discussing that actually the 21 Lessons from the 21st Century book by Yuval Harari, and he talks about this ethical dilemma, particularly with autonomous vehicles. So like once they become more accessible, how do you like does a buyer going in sign up something like okay, what if there's a scenario where I can either hit a child or it's a life-threatening situation where I want to protect myself. So that would be something that you, prior to buying that vehicle, you'll have an option to anonymously tell the manufacturer what you want, and in that way they'll tailor whatever algorithms are working in the background to your particular choice. So it's a complex moral dilemma that we are faced with.
Because it's complex, though, I want us to use language that is kind of shared and accessible. What is a zero-day exploit, right? Like, because again, I think there's the assumption that everyone knows what these things are. Everyone knows what ransomware is. Everyone knows what malware is. Can you go to the very basics as to what are these things?
Okay, so if I apologize for using that term here. So zero-day. Well, that's what it's called. A zero-day exploit is a undisclosed vulnerability in software. And basically, so there's a black market that, so the analogy I use in the old black and white movies, there's the sleazy bar by the port, which is full of like thieves and smugglers. So there's that kind of thing on the dark web. It's the intelligence agencies, it's thieves. Both buying and selling zero-day exploits. Zero-day exploits are valuable because, for example, everybody knows the Apple FBI case where they were trying to crack a phone and they couldn't do it, and the encryption was so strong, and Apple was resisting. So the FBI turned to the market and bought a zero-day exploit from an Israeli firm that found an undisclosed vulnerability in software, which basically said, oh, that's cute, all that encryption you did, now we're just into the whole system and we can extract the data, no problem. Okay, so a zero-day exploit is a way to essentially bypass, because it's an undisclosed, it's a vulnerability in the system that has not been patched. So it's worse than I'm making it sound, because like every week, Microsoft is releasing, or every month, like patches to like 60, 70, 100 different vulnerabilities in their software. This is all the code. So it's not just being sloppy, it's like really, really hard. There's so many lines of code and so many different interactions between all the complexity of the systems we're talking about. So every week there's more zero-day exploits being discovered by white hat researchers, gray hat research. So sometimes there's this UK researcher that basically by day he was defending against it, and in his spare time he was making money, selling exploits. So this is a way. So basically, now take this into the AI. So this is just a problem for software generally, that it's complicated and it's interacting not just with the software, the system, but now we have to think about the wireless network. You hear so basically in the security community say you should never use open Wi-Fi anywhere. Okay, I admit I use open Wi-Fi networks. Okay, so I'm not following the best practices because people could be sniffing and picking up information. Even companies that are professionally in this space, like Cloudflare, that usually by day is protecting you, they make mistakes and leak out open data. So there's just zero-day exploits is just one, but that's just one of, if we went through a list of 7, there's 16 more of these kinds of malware phishing. We're not going to take the time to go through them all. There's a lot of ways into systems that were not intended.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, so we can think about this now for at the national level or the international level, the United Nations level, sustainable development. We can think about it for companies or for individual products, at all different levels. We can be thinking about what the implications of good, bad, and ugly AI are. This is just me with the center. Okay, so with this, I'll go back to the first slide with this internet backpack. So the good news is, with this backpack, we can have secure, trusted connectivity to 90% of the planet today. without protecting against all those vulnerabilities, and that includes the capability to use machine learning or artificial intelligence anywhere on the planet. So saying that we don't have this, can't access it, that's the past. It can be done. You can make it secure cloud to edge tunnels, essentially, to anywhere. And you can do it with trust and identity. There's still some chance for vulnerabilities, but so basically the world today, is bad architecture. There's bad architecture everywhere by design, but it's possible to do much better, like we do with these internet. And the proof is there's a tiny little company which has these backpacks in 10 countries today, and nothing ever happens to them. This was done by design, where we were thinking about all those different paths and ways in, whether it's we have to know the trusted identity of the people, we have to know the institutions we're interacting with, and we have to know about the wireless networks, and we can do this with concerns for accessibility, and we can make this work as a worst case scenario survival as a service solution. So rather than 100,000 autonomous cars killing people, we can be using this to save lives from the rubble under Fukushima or anywhere else.
So let me just ask a clarifying question. So in the worst case scenario, there's a cyber attack, your entire grid is disconnected, you're shut off, water supplies, which are now on the grid, are shut down. You're saying that this can be an opportunity for a backup system to be able to make sure those systems are still going.
In 4 minutes, you can restore basically everything, yeah. The bad news is the legacy infected systems may still be, the physical systems may still be infected, but you can restore the operations, because most of the core functions are in the data centers, which have many more layers of security than these little mobile edge devices that are hanging in coffee shops.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, so I have to do again my financial conflict of interest disclosure. I'm on the board of IMCON International, which makes these internet backpacks, which are rolling out through public-private partnerships into Liberia, Costa Rica, Democratic Republic of Congo, and other countries. Working also with VMware that left now, basically, so the company worries about the secure edge connectivity, and VMware provides most of this secure path back to the cloud. For analytics or machine learning, part of what it's doing is finding the path. Like can you use Wi-Fi? Can you use cellular? Do you need to use an off-grid network? Do you need to use a satellite connectivity? Okay, where am I going? Okay, so how did this all get started? It started because people in Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo heard about our research, and they're living in a city next. This is not Photoshop. This is not deep fake. This is a real picture of the third most dangerous volcano in the world, next to a city of 2 million people. And when they heard about this internet backpack thing, instead of saying, yeah, we like all this advice you're giving us, but we need the pack yesterday. We needed to monitor the volcano. We need to get that data to make sure that children or animals we're not dying here. So that was the first place on Earth. So essentially, this most advanced system, the first place it was installed was in this conflict zone for this purpose, because they had the most pain and the most extreme need for it. Since then, it's rolled forward, and you could be meshing these and creating this wider, intelligent community of packs and people and devices and resources, whether for education or healthcare or emergency response. So that's essentially where see this diffusion path for. Again, there's still chances that any one of these things could get attacked, or actually when we were in the Congo, the very first one, the UN peacekeepers there saw it and say, okay, that's nice, but I say, yeah, but it didn't yet have this kind of VMware security wrapping. So I say, it's not ready for you. President Sirleaf was one of the first to get these in Liberia. And then after it was installed, 6 months later, she's saying, no, is this secure enough? And the company's saying, yeah, it is. And I'm saying, yeah, it's not really that. So there's always more that can be done. But again, keeping this tied to the main theme of AI, in these systems, you can have essentially this secure tunnel to artificial intelligence, machine learning applications that are protected and safe. But that's assuming the original system was done by design. If the design was flawed from the beginning, or was biased or whatever. Where just because we made it accessible in these places doesn't mean it's really useful or the proper design. I mentioned.
Sorry.
Yep.
To that point, I think especially for communications, for example,
Yeah,
for
I'm gonna stop.
WhatsApp, Facebook, not proactively but reactively after the whole privacy thing became an issue, and Zuckerberg had to answer Congress. I think it's then that they started end-to-end encryption for WhatsApp in order to ensure that my messages are not snooped upon. So I think end-to-end encryption could be one example.
Absolutely. So end-to-end encryption is critical, but it's not enough. There's something called I'm trying not to be too tokenization. So you tokenize the data, you encrypt it, you use secure cloud-to-edge technology. I'm just showing one last example of a slide, and then we can stop and just make it a conversation. But having this like one little island, like that from each of these packs, you can have up to, we've had up to 25 simultaneous users, up to 250 or 250 different devices can be connected. So you can create this little like AI island anywhere, which has all kinds of potential for healthcare, education, medical uses, and so on. That's all great. But if it's relying on the satellite to get back out, that's very expensive. So putting like reverse engineering parts of the world that have limited access, including to AI, involves also rebuilding networks with unlicensed wireless network backbones that are like essentially like I talked about earlier in the day. That basically, if you don't have the connectivity, you're not going to have the AI. You're not going to have AI working for very long or very, very usefully. So this provides very low cost bandwidth build outs. We're providing for this is cheap. So you can create nation scale or state scale backbone networks that would then make it possible to access good AI by design. And I'll stop there.
So what is really most interesting about this technology is not just the ability to kind of provide access to internet in an affordable way, it's the kind of privacy, security, inclusion aspects that are probably most interesting that I don't think we often talk about. So to be clear, the cloud architecture, and if you can think about what architecture is, it's like the design of how the software is going to be used to be able to communicate with and amongst all these devices. In the design is the sense of privacy, ensuring that the communications will be secured, and making sure that you do this in a way that is inclusive. By that, making sure that the people who are in vulnerable communities have the ability to have the digital literacy to engage and to benefit economically from this. And so it's not just thinking about, we need to have internet so that a corporation can be able to get the data, your very private public health data, so that they can begin to sell you pharmaceutical applications or look at your data to be able to develop pharmaceutical applications. You would own that data. Mm-hmm. And so what doesn't happen in this current time is that there are people who are called data brokers who broker your data and sell your data to third parties who may sell to other third parties without you getting a cut, without you getting a share, without your knowledge. And so I think what this is trying to do, in addition to a number of other type of applications, is making sure that I own my data. And actually my data is now a commodity that I can choose to allow you to purchase or not. And that's what I think makes this really interesting for places like Liberia or other countries that can be exploited. And so I want to make sure that we get the audience an opportunity to kind of interact in this conversation, and for the audience to be able to think, and this may have felt a lot more techie than folks probably were able to engage in, but I think this is a really important contribution, both on the security side, making sure that how are we protecting ourselves and our data from cyber criminals, how are we protecting them from bad actors, how are we protecting them from those who are gray hats or white hats or folks who are really going to likely exploit this information, but more importantly, how can we use this and think about in the design process, designing for different types of outcomes. And so if folks have questions, please feel free. Yes?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm actually Well, I think AI presents a lot of great things for the society, but at the same time, as Dr. Nana said, there's the good, bad, and ugly. Now we're focusing on the ugly, unfortunately. When we look at sort of, IoT is still in its infancy, but if we look at what they're using for a while, let's say, look at the iPhone, right? I use most of my devices Apple. They don't pay me for advertising, but my stuff sync with each other. That's IoT, right? Simple form of IoT. But when you think about more on a massive scale, that using AI now in conjunction of making potentially coordinated attacks very, very freaking scary. Any thoughts about how can we minimize these kind of risks from a technological standpoint?
Well, I'll just say briefly that that's part of the reason I'm hanging with the federal government agencies, like last week at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So getting this kind of message out quickly about like improving practice, this is urgent because and we should be clear, there's a lot of AI applications that are sort of embedded in industrial systems, that there's no human interface, that are relatively, even if they were like sloppily designed, they're so buried, it's like hard for anybody externally to get access to them to make them, malicious. So it's not like we have to really just say AI is bad altogether. However, there are the systems that can be accessed by people or can interact with humans or can interact with our cars or our planes, and those are the ones that we need to worry about. So doing it, there's no option but by doing it by design. I think that just would say this is not optional going forward. We have to improve the standard of AI design and insist on this, because otherwise we know we already, the ransomware attacks are happening all around, and now if it's not just seizing the system but manipulating it and turning it bad, that's not, you can think it's kind of a cute way to rephrase it, but we know that's coming. Whether the RAND study, maybe it's only 50,000 cars attacking us.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges that we have to overcome is making sure that there are interagency mechanisms to be able to communicate across wide and varying times governmental agencies. There isn't really a government in the US agency who is tasked with this, and especially currently. And the concern is that because there isn't one kind of head of this discussion, we're not planning for these futures. Now, there are definitely agencies that are thinking about this. DHS is thinking about this. DOD is thinking about this. But the ability to make sure that there is this interagency collaboration is going to be needed moving forward so that we can begin to make sure that we're not looking at this in silos. Part of what in the public administration world we talked about as one of the failings of 9/11 is that multiple agencies had intelligence, but they were not communicating with other agencies. That was why DHS was created. That's why the DNI was created, to be able to have that interagency conversation. And we're going to need to begin to think about doing these type of strategies in the cyber world as well. Thank you for your question. There was yes.
Hi, I got a question as well. It's a bit like vague, probably, but it's concerning the facial recognition.
Could you speak up?
Sure. I'm sorry. So I got a question regarding the facial recognition. I'm pretty sure you heard gasoline news from China. The way they are harassing minority, Muslim minority. And I'm pretty sure they are able to do that through facial recognition, actually, because as I said before, like in development, it can turn into something ugly, and ugly is actually an understatement. Because today, I wonder if it's true, I really hope it's not, but apparently in the camps to which even like UN peacekeepers can get in, people are harvesting organs. They are like harvesting like organs of the people, the Muslim minority. And they've been able to like target the minority through like facial recognition. So like I'm just gonna try and like formulate into question. So like bear in mind that like there's still like facial recognition tool is already out there, and there's not much we can do about it. Is there something still like, is there any chance we could I don't know, reverse engineer or like, I don't know, like stop it?
So Well, excellent question. Excellent question. So several cities in the United States have banned facial recognition or banned certain applications of facial recognition. In the city of Syria, and I think Yusuf might have another opinion. In the public-private partnership with the city, the university, ACLU, what the cities asked us to study facial recognition, machine learning, and AI in general, with basically developing some principles or policies, like when could this be applied or not applied. So getting back to saying, I think we should have had these conversations maybe 10 years ago, but now it's urgent to have these kinds of conversations as AI is already out there, so you're saying it's too late. But here's one concrete example for China that I wanted sometimes use. So there's a big protest in Hong Kong with varying crowd estimates of 170,000 people to 500,000, I think the protesters said, and a AI/facial recognition startup put cameras and iPads around the city, and they came up with an estimate that said there were 226,000 protesters, and they got worldwide publicity for this use of their technology. And of course, all those protesters were trying to cover their face and not be recognized. So that's like why are you using? My question is, you're trying to count crowds. Why are you using facial recognition to count crowds and possibly get people, and you're saying, well, they blurred out the pictures of the faces. And where's this company headquartered? In Hong Kong? Which government are they going to have to report to? Is that data really secure? No. There's another technology out of Syracuse from a company called Density, which you could just use sensors. You could get the body mass of people. You could tell how many people were in that crowd without anything. So you could have an anonymous body. If you really were just trying to count crowd size, you don't need facial recognition. You should not use that technology. So it's the same kind of thing. There's misuse of technology where that costs more, has danger of misuse. That should not be allowed. If you're counting crowds, don't use facial recognition. You don't need that. So it doesn't solve the issue you talked about directly, but there are some attempts, or there are ways to avoid some of the negative sides.
Yeah, I think the question you raise is more foundational to the society, and unfortunately it's been accepted as a governmental practice that we will use facial recognition technology. I don't think that there's ever, and I'm being very clear from a civil libertarian perspective, and a probably explicit privacy perspective, that we ever trust facial recognition technology or biometric technology, or even in the case of Density, that can count motion, etc., because it shares a lot of information that talks about your movement, your activities in ways that can be used and abused to particularly target political dissenters. And we are very intimately concerned about those issues. In fact, we already know today that the actions and activities of political dissenters like Black Lives Matter activists or water keepers, who are indigenous groups that are trying to advocate for clean water, is already being monitored. And so we are deeply concerned with those types of issues, and we don't believe there's a place for it ever. So I mean, I'm probably a loud voice, but one of the few voices in that room, and thank you, because I have Professor McKnight who can say, no, we need to think about these things to validate the concerns that we're raising. We don't actually, there should ever be a potential use for these types of technologies, period. And that may not be the most popular decision, but we don't trust them in the hands of government ever, because government hasn't been able to be good stewards of that technology, or technology in any regard when it comes to political dissenters. So I'm sorry we can't answer the question about the reverse engineering aspects of it, but I think if there are some startups here, we should probably figure out how to do that and get together and at least have that discussion. Are there other questions? I know there was a hand. Okay, there's two hands here, and then we'll go to you. Yep.
Yeah, so basically I'm kind of piggybacking off that last one. My question is it fair to come up with an international standard for AI development? I think there's a lot of applications, particularly, if we're piggybacking off this last story, China might have different standards that Americans simply do not accept. And I think that, as you start to get more nuanced applications of AI, an international standard becomes almost seemingly impossible or really difficult. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on that, if you could explore it, because I think an international standard would be helpful, But once you start taking into account the cultural boundaries and what's culturally accepted, I think that becomes a bit more challenging, especially as it starts to become more integrated. And I'm just hoping you can explore that topic.
Yep, just a quick comment on that. I think what's important in terms of having a universal standard, it will have to be tailored to the specific application, because AI techniques and the way you use them for governance or for mobility applications or whatever you have vary so widely that it's kind of impossible to have an overall guideline. But having said that, I think the conversation needs to be more around how much of government oversight versus complete civilian autonomy do you suggest in that space. So I would think a balance of autonomy and regulation is the way forward. But some people argue completely against it, and some people are for complete corporate autonomy in terms of coming up with their own regulations around what constitutes as fair, AI-based algorithms. And I think that the inherent, a bit off topic, but the problem with AI and machine learning based models is the model is only as good or as valid as the data that you're feeding in. If you're feeding garbage in, you're getting garbage out. So that's the key thing that you that people need to understand in terms of putting their faith in predictions around future of work or future of mobility or future of war or anything that's related to things that are 10 years, 15 years down the horizon.
Yeah, the only I'm happy you mentioned that, because one of the things that I get deeply concerned about is let's just take, and in fact, lots of cities and communities around the US are thinking about using algorithms for sentencing because they're saying, let's take the bias out of sentencing, so let's let software determine the sentencing. But the problem is, as you say, what you put into it is already inherently racist and biased. And so what they do what winds up happening as an outcome is people of color are still more disproportionately sentenced at higher rates. In one case, there was a girl who was in a fight who never committed a crime, who never had any issues with law, but because someone in her family had law enforcement activity, the algorithm perceived that she was more likely to commit another crime again, and therefore would give her more sentencing. Right? Than the person who actually committed multiple crimes, who got a fewer sentence for the same exact crime. He wound up repeating again. And so this is the problem with these types of algorithms and these data sets that we're using, because the people are also biased who are making them themselves. You, and then the two questions here, one here, and you're the last question. 1, 2. Response.
I think the crime example is an absolute classic example of how biases in the data itself or in the code can lead to such gross injustices. And in fact, in my second quarter in my class on ethics in AI, that was a case that we studied on recidivism scores. And you essentially have a multivariate equation which predicts the likelihood of someone committing a crime. And amongst the predictors, you have ethnicity, income, all those factors that would predict the likelihood of someone committing a crime. And the false positive rates in those instances, meaning you hypothesize that the person was going to commit a crime, but in fact they did not, were so high that the European data regulations now allow anyone to contest any decision in a criminal court that's based on a machine learning algorithm. I don't think that's happened in the US.
We have, as I said, we got 2 more questions. Your question, you are the last.
Yeah, just to build off what you were saying, I completely agree that bias in data or algorithms can perpetuate and lead to even more injustice. So my question is, when does the use of AI applicable? Are there best practices of when a problem can be solved with artificial intelligence? I often think that if you have a biased data set, like you said, implementing AI can go down this terrible path. So when do you know you have quality data that AI can effectively create solutions?
So I was trying to conclude on an optimistic note, so what I was going to say to the prior question about saying, the positions that there can never be some common standard. I'm optimistic about future certified ethical AI developers, some of which may be in the room, who can do better than we do now, that we can have confidence anywhere in the world that somebody's a certified ethical AI developer, tried to at least understand all these issues and at least tried to make sure they did the best they could. Now, we can't control what the governments did, but at least the developer was conscious and trying. Now, back to your question right now, I'm afraid that the truth is, hey, it sucks.
Last question.
So this is probably a very naive question. So I've been involved with software development for a long time from a managerial standpoint, and there's a theorem. The theorem is there are always going to be bugs. I remember when I was at AT&T years ago, and I was listening to a talk by the quality assurance group on the first generation electronic switch, which was about to be retired, and they had a plot of the number of bugs that they had found versus time, and it was not zero, even at the time when they were about to retire the switch. So the question, anyway, is, are there situations that are so important that, aside from mismanagement, aside from bias, aside from bad actors, and aside from bad data, that are so important that if there were a bug, they would not want to use the system to do something that it was just so important that if there were a bug, the bad consequences would, even if there was ethical and good quality assurance and so forth. So that's the question.
Okay, so another slide I showed shows a picture of a European, I forget which planet they crashed into because of a software bug. So if you just lost like $1 billion satellite or space probe because of somebody forgetting, mixing up that. So the truth is there's no one class there, but there is again hope. There's something called, actually it has a kind of funky algorithm name, so I'll say it here, and this is the first time you've heard it probably, SBOM, which is a software bill of materials, right? That's the first time you heard it? Okay, so a software bill of materials means at least we know who wrote the code, what it was supposed to do, and how it was developed. So there's work on developing trustworthy software components, so that if we know, basically, I guess going back to the prior question, if we know the software was built from trustworthy components, we can manage to put those together, and then even if there's a bug in one of them, we should be able to sort of isolate it so it doesn't crash the whole system. We should have a level architecture, this good architecture, so good architecture can win over time. That's my optimism.
Thank you. I am not an optimist, but I'm ever hopeful. And so I am hopeful that we can begin to think about these things more critically, begin to think about the ways with which these things can address the security concerns, the privacy concerns, be inclusive of folks who have been marginalized and vulnerable populations, and do it in such a way that it's a part of the design process. Really, we need to have a new paradigm shift in how we design these types of algorithms, these types of technologies that at its core take an intergenerational equity approach and are cognizant of these types of issues that we brought about today. I want to thank you, Jalal, and Professor McKnight for your time here today and on this second fireside chat of this afternoon without fires, so no CO2 emissions. Thank you both. It is exactly 5 o'clock, which means we are now going to go directly to our last closing keynote.